I want to go back to what you talked about prioritization. That was the first thing that you decided that you needed to focus on. So do you have what was like the framework for how you thought about like what to prioritize first? Like why did you choose certain things first? And then I think the other part that I think is really interesting is how did you create that alignment for that priority across the entire engineering organization? Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so we'll talk about what we chose for priority, but in general, if as engineering managers, as product leaders, as technology leaders, the thing that you need to start with is the highest level, right? So, what principles are you operating in, and what priorities do you have for the organization? Because if you are very specific in terms of these are the only three things that you do, then people only do those three things. That may or may not be the right thing to do. So, start with principles. So what we did several years ago, before this happened, uh, we defined four principles for us as an organization, and I'll describe a couple of them. But I blogged about this in the engineering overview blog that I had some months ago, and there's also a handbook that describes some of these processes. So we chose a couple of things, but it all depends on the context of different companies. As a leader, you need to figure out what's most important for you. What principles do you stand for? There's always going to be a company values, which is always the thing that you need to follow. And then are there other things that you layer on as part of your organization that makes you more effective? So, and for us, we chose four things, and I'll describe a couple of things. One is customers. So we said customers are our lifeblood, and we act accordingly. And what this meant was we have a company value for customers, but we wanted to go one step further because you want engineers to be close to customers. And there's always cases where, oh, I have this feature to work on, I have this other thing to do. Which one is better? And if the thing is, oh, if your product is down or if it's hacked, then there is like huge pain for customers. Then it's the priority becomes easier. So these principles actually help guide the prioritization. So we said customers are our lifeblood. So even for innovation and to have non-linear kind of impact to our customers, you need to have every single person in the organization think customers. So we chose customers as our number one principle. The second thing we wanted to do was to be able to create these autonomous teams, right? That was an explicit intentional goal. So our second principle was we have a radically autonomous and aligned teams, right? And there's a lot packed in this. The obvious thing that comes to people's mind is we are loosely coupled, highly aligned. We want to have these because we are in this microservices architecture. Each of the teams need to be highly autonomous so they can run on its own. So that's the first level of autonomous, right? So that is straightforward, understood. We went one step further to have the practices. The radical part of we want to be radically autonomous is each team wants to be autonomous, and their job is also to make the dependent teams autonomous. If you think about that way, then what they have to do is not just say, oh yeah, I don't want to talk to anybody else, I want to run on my own, where you have this chaos in the system where everybody starts running off in different directions. Like, you don't want that. What you really want is you want these teams to enable other teams to be autonomous. So what we did was that's why we defined this radically autonomous, which means your job is to make sure as a team, like let's say you're a 10% team, to make other dependent teams to be fully autonomous so they don't bother you. So you are actually autonomous because they're not bothering you. You write your documentation, you make your APIs better, you make sure that your tests are run so that you don't fail, they don't bug you. So that actually helps to be able to scale much better.
Jerry, do you have follow up questions or other comments? Because I saw you shaking your head throughout the entire, like in earnest excitement throughout the entire response there.
I just so excited to hear all of that, and because we've been thinking about from for our own team, but also from engineering leader participating in our communities or peer groups and other occasion, like they surface those challenges, and I feel like this is a approach that almost any organization can take it and implement, and this is really new in terms of like new perspectives. Make your own teams, but your dependent teams autonomous. So that's a very good constraint to think about. And also the thing you mentioned earlier, highly aligned but loosely coupled. So those are the codes that I've been writing down.
Yeah, and those are all right. The other thing to notice is like it's easy to say certain things, like the DNA change, culture change. Like if you just type in an email and say, "Oh, you have to do it this way," it just doesn't work that way, right? It's not effective. Not because people are trying to avoid the things that you want to do as a leader. You tell them, "Oh, this is the direction we want to go." What as a leader, what you need to do is to be able to unblock how they operate. So that's where the system comes into picture, right? So you want to make sure that they have the right processes in place and systems in place, so that if they're like, oh yeah, of course I want to do this, but I have this other priority, they need to have the priority sorted out. They might be like, I want to do this, but I don't know how to do this. So you need to have processes laid out or automation done so that it's easier. And the friction for doing a new thing, you need to automate that and tool it so that it's much lower, so that you can actually steer in a different direction, not status quo that you had.